Thank you everyone for coming tonight. My name is Sarah Audsley and I am the Writing Across Media Facilitator at the Vermont Studio Center. As a short introduction, Carlos Andrés Gómez is a Colombian American poet from New York City. He is the author of the full-length poetry collection Fractures, selected by Natasha Trethewey as the winner of the 2020 Felix Pollak Prize in Poetry, the chapbook Hijito, selected by Eduardo C. Corral as the winner of the 2018 Broken River Prize, and the memoir Man Up, Reimagining Modern Manhood. He is also the winner of the Sandy Crimmins National Prize for Poetry and the Atlanta Review International Poetry Prize. His poems have been published in many wonderful, amazing literary journals and online mags. And Carlos is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College. Our second reader tonight, Cynthia Dewi Oka, is the author of Salvage and Nomad of Salt and Hard Water. Her work has appeared widely in print and online, most recently in Pleiades, Prism International, The Undefeated, Scoundrel Time, and elsewhere. With community partner Asian Arts Initiative, she created Sanctuary, a migrant poetry workshop for immigrant poets in Philadelphia. She has been awarded scholarships from Bona and the Vermont Studio Center, the Fifth Wednesday Journal Editors Prize in Poetry, the Tupelo Quarterly Poetry Prize, the Leeway Foundation's Transformation Award, and the Amy Clampett Residency 2021 and 2022. Upcoming. Originally from Bali, Indonesia, she holds an MFA from Warren Wilson College and currently teaches creative writing at Bryn Mawr College. Thank you both for being here tonight. I'm so excited for your readings and for our discussion about your work. To open it up tonight, I was wondering if you would be interested in discussing or talking about what does support and community mean for you as writers? And how have you maintained your writing practice in the midst of so much uncertainty? And how are you avoiding refreshing your newsfeed browser right now?
I think in terms of community and writing, you know, part of that is right here with you all and feeling kind of like, I think the MFA experience was very important for me. I feel like I'm part of like a larger cohort of people, of like writers who are engaged with the world and with their craft, and in equal measure. And within that, I think there are also like, I have writing partners, I have smaller writing crews that I have like a regular practice with. Y'all know Idrissa, like I have like a Friday night is like our weekly hot date, like where we just like talk about work, but what we're working on. So that's also been incredibly valuable. But then I think I'm also hearing this question in terms of the larger sense of community, which feels really difficult right now in many ways because we can't see and hang out with each other in the same way. Because I feel like in so many ways, my writing, the questions I grapple with, the issues I'm interested in, are informed by non-literary communities, quote unquote, like the working class immigrant community that I come from, like the experiences of my family, the historical kind of backdrop of like how I got here. And there have been multiple histories kind of intertwining, contesting each other within that. And I also think about that as like community in the sense that it is a community that transcends time, that transcends the present and is continuing, in that I feel like accountable to them, and also feel like their influence very deeply in my work. So maybe I'll pause there for that initial stab at that first question.
I deeply resonate with that, Cynthia. I mean, when I think about community, when I think about the idea of support and community as a writer. You know, I've heard that so many writers and mentors say, you know, writing is a solitary endeavor. You know, you're in a cabin in a beautiful place like Vermont and you're just writing and you're not talking to anybody. I'm just joking, Sarah. You know, Vermont Studio Center. Please invite me back in person someday. But yeah, no, but you know, for me, you know, I came up in poetry and literary scenes in Philly and New York, where I was always surrounded by community. Coming up through the poetry slam and open mic scene, you know, I do the first Friday at the Painted Bride in Old City in Philly, and I'd go to the New York Poets Cafe in New York and Bar 13 and Bowery Poetry Club. I mean, I spent years where you know, I probably a decade stretch from 2000 to 2010 that I went to 2 to 3 open mics a week for 10 years, you know? And, you know, every night at any of those venues in New York, you know, Aracelis Girmay and Ross Gay and Patricia Smith and, you know, whoever, and, or like, you know, Patrick Rosal, and like, this is just like the community of just people having a drink, talking. You talk about the work, you talk about life. Kind of what you're saying too, Cynthia, is like the real world that I've lived in has always been intertwined with my artistic practice, with my concept of what's literary and being a writer. So I feel like for me, you know, when I got my MFA, that was the first time I'd really, I think, been in that kind of a cultural space, to be candid. I'd never been around that kind of a community before, people who were lending themselves with such emphaticness to building their technique as a writer. I think I've often been around other artists, but I've had, you know, friends who play the cello and they, you know, organize protests. You know, I mean, they're poets, but not like me. So I think that, you know, I think I deeply just resonate with what you said, Cynthia.
I think there was a second part. There was a second question. Sarah, do you mind repeating it?
Oh yeah, I mean, the second question is just how you're both maintaining your practice in the midst of so much uncertainty in the current political climate. And then my selfish question is also how you're doing that as a person of color in the world. But yeah.
I think what's interesting for me is that as I started, you know, I came into poetry after I was organizing and also after I was already a mom, because I was a young mom. And precariousness is something I'm very familiar with, from like not knowing how you're gonna pay like next week's rent, you know, etc. And there is a heightened kind of, we are in a heightened situation in the sense that I don't feel isolated in experiencing that degree of precariousness in relation to sort of like my peers or whoever was my community at the time. So there's like a kind of globalization of the anxiety. But I think because my writing practice developed under those circumstances, it hasn't been really affected in the same way, or like as drastically as I might have anticipated. So I have taken egregious advantage of like quarantine, of like not having to lose time commuting to work, and just getting to consume like a lot more art than I otherwise would have. And I'm also obviously like in a different situation in my life where there's just a bit more spaciousness than before. And it was something I really had to fight for, just to have like space to be able to like think and create, like not at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I feel really proud of like the fight that I took on to be able to do that. And some of it is just kind of like, honestly, in terms of like how to continue creating with this degree of anxiety, it was a little bit like riding a bike for me. And this week, I will say, was really bad because Tuesday has been here. Like, we haven't changed days. Like, it's still Tuesday as far as I'm concerned. So that's different. And, you know, I think something that you were saying around like the part on, you know, what does it mean to be like writers of color, or like how do you kind of maintain, defend that practice? I think it's like a deeply, deeply political revolutionary act for us to defend our creative practice. And I will say that like sort of the kind of anxiety and all of this stuff that always accompanied my writing practice as a result of the socioeconomic conditions that I was living through, it also taught me to be fiercely guarded, to fiercely guard my writing time. And so it's like weird because I hate that those were the conditions, and I'm also thankful that those were the conditions. So I feel like there's that, and I really want us in this particular moment, I think, you know, the language of authoritarianism is out there. The language of fascism is out there. Obviously, white supremacy is like documentedly on the rise. And like, let's be very clear that BIPOC took one for the team. If we pull through out of this, it's because BIPOC took one for the team. The team that's never cared for them. Like, in terms of who is carrying the labor of like organizing on the ground and all of this stuff. And as someone who's also been in that situation, been an organizer and kind of tried to navigate these different, you know, like how do you balance it? How do you fight for your time inside of that? I would like us to, and hear your thoughts on this, Carlos. It's like, no matter what happens next, my creative practice, my right to think my thoughts and my feelings are sacred to me, no matter where the train goes next. That's something I've been thinking about, because we so often do not have the protection or entitlement to be able to do that. It's always like whatever the whim is of the powers that be that we have to kind of, you know, prioritize.
Cynthia, can I ask a follow-up? Or am I breaking the rules here? Sarah, feel free to censure me. I just love hearing about people's like process and practice. What does that daily practice look like for you? Like, is there an amount of time you have carved out? Is it a certain time of the day? I'm just curious as to what that is, like that sacredly guarded time.
Yeah. So I've been there's been a major shift because I left my organizing job in the summer. So for the majority of my time as a writer, it's been, you know, it's been really early mornings because I didn't want to come to the page tired at the end of the day. I'd rather come to work tired than write tired. And now, because I'm teaching, it's kind of dependent on my teaching schedule, but I try to protect the morning. I don't have to wake up at 4 anymore, and this is it's amazing. It's incredible. And I know you still do. And I'm so sorry, Carlos, but there is another side, and it's awesome on the other side. So
I've heard this. I don't know when that arrives, but I've heard about this.
Yeah, I mean, I try to protect like blocks of time. So either a couple of hours. If my teaching schedule doesn't allow it, then I'll block off days. Like entire days where it's just like the door is closed unless things are on fire. And actually, I don't really care because other people can fix that.
So we have firefighters, right?
So we have firefighters and other people in the house, like whatever. My son's big. He can lift buckets of water. So how about you?
Wow, there's so much about that just inspires me, instructs me. I resonate with as well. I mean, I think I'm at a very different point than you in my parenting journey with a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. So we're still going to cycles where we're working on potty training our son and have sleep regressions and have people deciding not to take naps anymore, and it's very there's a lot of just attention and focus and really critical, vital time that I have to invest everything with both kids. I think for me, of course, you said so much brilliant stuff, and I kind of just want to talk about you for a second. I feel like of all that I know about Cynthia Dewi Oka, I think of tenacious and uncompromising, like as a human being, as an intellectual, as a creative. And I just, I from the moment I've met you, I just feel that. I mean, for those of you who are tuning in or watching right now and don't know about Cynthia, you're hard pressed to find a more well-read person than Cynthia. I mean, Cynthia and I had the same supervisor in grad school, and I was like, Cynthia, so tell me about what you think I should put on this list and suggest. And Cynthia gave me, 50 books, and I was like, okay, let me ask my supervisor which 25 we're going to pick, and then let me read the 25 on my own. So I think that's I think for me, so much of my, and I think it's also a function of parenthood, which I think deeply disrupted the practices and sort of rituals of my writing practice. I think a lot of it now has been an act of just letting go of the kind of structures that I had in place. Because even even like the 5 a.m. Writers Club, and all that stuff, that stuff's really cute. But if my daughter is up at 10 after 6 and I'm with her, and there are periods where I was with both kids for large majority of the day for 6 months for 15 hours, it's a recipe for, not living very long. and I want to live through the whole shutdown, and beyond. So, I think for me, it's just having those moments where, our son finally naps, and then our daughter's kind of doing her reading app, and then I just steal time here and there. So it's stealing out these times, and just being disciplined about those moments, and then understanding that all of it, a lot of writing too, I'm sure you're like this too, a lot of my writing is processing ideas as I'm doing other things. So the act of sitting down and writing is more an extension of some of that. So I think I'm writing down concepts and ideas and lines and piecing things together and revising and editing and reading things and reaching for resources. So it's a lot more scattered and less cohesive than I would like. But anyone who's watching right now who's ever had a 2 and a 5-year-old understands chaos. Listen, if we lived in a palace and had 4 people helping us, it'd be very different. But with my partner working full time and very, very overloaded, it's just, we're in the moment that we're in. So that's where we are.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Sorry, Sarah, I'm ruining all your plans.
No, I want this conversation to continue, and I also want you two to read poems.
Okay. We promise we will read poems. And okay, so this is Carlos's beautiful book. It's so beautiful. And while you were talking just about sort of the Tetris that you have to do, I'm really struck by the generosity of the collection, of the stories that you tell, of the emotional and aesthetic depth that you sort of plunge into in the book. There are so many stories here that span, it's everything from childhood to parents to love to losing friends. There's an incredible accounting for these different moments where, I think that it's interesting, the title is Fractures, and each fracture is whole.
Wow.
And there's a kind of shiningness. I feel like that's the only word I can think of right now. To each of them, and I would love for you to share kind of, there's this tension of just like the conditions of work in which you have to write them, and how sort of the tension, the stress, maybe even the exhaustion.
Yes.
How do you channel that? How do you manage that to offer so much, to be so generous in the poems? Because they're also, you know, I think what's also like, what also really struck me about this book is like this kind of this stubbornness in the face of fragmentation, the face of things that want us to be split up. And it's a powerful, I think, the poems work for me in this very productive relationship with the title.
Wow.
So I just wonder how, just process wise, what's that like for you?
Wow. I would say, I think so much. Yeah. Wow. I'm first of all, I'm honored by what you said, but I think it's so easy to be swept up. I mean, I think about what has always compelled me so much about poetry is it's holding something up to the light, or it's drawing your gaze towards something that it's so easy to walk past and not notice, and yet the whole world is there. Like everything is there. Like all these things are captured in this little snapshot, or this moment, or this whatever it is. And I think for this collection, when you know, just the way you're talking about it, I think for me, it's so easy in the inertia of life to be pulled along and miss the complexity and the messiness and the humanity and the other side of grief and the other side of joy and like all the other complex and even, you know, paradoxical emotions that are sort of carried along with another thing that you more readily see. And I think for me, I wanted to kind of, you know, if I'm going to give the world this collection, I want to slow things down. I want to say, please sit with me. Look at this. Look at this life that we have, you know? And I think that's what I was trying to do, and that's what I was hoping to do. And then, of course, the mentors I had in grad school were the ones who allowed me to render them in such a way, you know, that none of this would be possible without them, but in this way. But I think that was why I lent, you know, that's what I think I gave myself to, was hoping to be able to allow the reader, I wanted them to feel that generosity. So it means a lot that you saw that.
Yes, there is. You totally resist reduction in this book.
Wow.
So I have so much appreciation and just like, so like it's like the full spectrum of emotions that I get to experience. And I feel like, that you're right. It's like I don't usually, it's like I otherwise wouldn't make time for it. You know what I mean? Like I otherwise would not even be able to have the opportunity to know how I feel.
Wow. Yes. Yes. Oh.
Yeah. It's like so please buy this book because it is an education for your life. Fractures.
I want to hear Cynthia read. Poems from Salvage.
Boy. You read now? I don't know what happens next.
But
Sarah, what happens next? Tell us what it's supposed to be now.
This is Sarah. I'm just invited.
Cynthia, you can read, and then Carlos can read. Does that make sense? Or is everyone happy with that?
Yes. I am happy with this. I will just read, I think I'll just read 3 poems, and they're all from Salvage. They happen to be poems that I worked on a lot. They were poems that became mature during my time as an artist in residence at VSE, so it feels apt. Thank you. And the other thing is something just kind of like as a framing in terms of also how I selected them is I was having this conversation with my son about abolition and about just kind of like the movements that are happening in the world right now. And I asked him, and we were talking about, what are the possibilities for justice if like Biden were elected or if Trump were elected. And I realized at that point when we were talking that, justice is very difficult to define. And I asked him, and my son is 17, and I asked him, like, what does justice mean for you? And he said this thing that punched me so hard in the face that I had to like leave the room. He said, well, I think justice and punishment are two different things. Punishment is a taking away from the perpetrator. Justice is a bringing up of everyone around the perpetrator. Yeah, that's verbatim because I had to write it down. And he said,
Goosebumps.
I know. And from the mouths of babes, and he said, justice.
Please, can you please email that verbatim that
I will.
after this?
I will totally email it to you.
Gosh.
And he said, like, justice is a learning how to move forward after what's happened. And I was thinking about, how our poems are so often placeholders for justice, because that justice that we envision, we don't have a process for it yet. And so I think that is something I was thinking about as I was selecting these. So, okay, I'll just read 3 poems. They're all fairly short. And then it's all you, Carlos. Remission. Between gospel and the belt, a daughter learns her lines. Each mote in her father's eye, she reads to learn her lines. A pure faith, impossible without hypocrisy, even more for immigrants who have not learned their lines. He'd sing each hymn as though it were ransom for his life. The child he'd hold too long, refusing to learn her lines. I fell into a paddy field. The leeches grew fat on my belly and thighs. Bloodlust quickly learned my lines. Bent double from stiff winters and the debt of nations, poems too get heavy, hang low as they learn their lines. How much exile is enough? How many treeless plains before the hands wither, trying to learn their lines? When his body began to die, he said, the fruit of prayer is fire. Ashes, see if you can learn their lines. The homeless share much in common with birds. Feast of crumbs, flight, voices that unclothed language won't learn its lines. Then I saw light kiss the smooth skull, cobalt country of veins. A door left ajar when he was learning his lines. How could I choose your epitaph? I'm no Samuel who heeded Jehovah in the stone and learned his lines. A man who becomes his own memory, like the belt, will not sting again, nor learn another body's lines. Look how empty this moonlight is. Come unto me, and I will give you rest. Ah, your daughter has learned her lines. All right, this is Abad. When the wedding was over, the witnesses gone, the wine-stained dress back in the arms of its maker, we drove down to Monterey, 40-degree weather to test the eternity we had sworn to. I thought I heard the ghosts of Mac and Eddie laughing in the trees as we fumbled for warmth, suddenly cruel, clumsy with each other in the middle of a room dazed by its own genealogy. Mahogany armoire and wrought iron table, Victorian sofa and navy rose print, cupids engraved in the oak bed, cheeks flaring hallelujah at redcoats on the wall, whose rifles are trained on coppery men with wrists tied behind their backs, a gold leaf frame. Moths flickered, scraps of news from another world ablaze on the spinal cord of night, as though they too had touched the fury of our fathers when we as children crushed earlobes into fists as they dug pits in our mothers who endured and kept enduring, who mended themselves like old uniforms that would not be outgrown. We came as though nakedness wasn't at once a forked road and the fury drawing its noose around us. I want to believe the sun hovered in the lark's throat before it flew away, before we saw the white wall rise behind each other's eyes, remnants from when we held a howl in our hands and tried to write the story of forgiveness. And this last one I actually read for the first time at VSE at the resident reading. So, throwback. I was like, this is for you, Terrence, because he was the visiting poet at the time. And I remember he like hated the first draft of this, so I like worked really hard on it while I was at residency. Or like he just, anyway. Throwbacks. Tonight we drank whiskey and dive. Over the balcony rail, 200 feet up, I watch my brothers walk to the liquor store. It's spring. The sun has just poured its last russet malt over the ice of the Rockies, and the air is laced with reggae, cop sirens, kids shouting across islands of concrete. We've been discussing what it means to be poets of color, how we often feel obligated to make the agonies of our communities dance, to paraphrase Baraka, to take sides in wars we had hoped our poetry would help us transcend, and how still our bodies divide, though we burst at the seams into costumes of power and desire we spend our lives repairing, we men, we women. Now the dark lifts its woolen head, a sapphire god. My poet brothers almost imperceptibly hunch their shoulders, dig hands into pockets, shifting their route to blend into the densest shadows. I see Hari's cigarette go out, Save's Kangol a drifting temple. Then for a split second, a net of crows swoops low over them, and I flinch. How can I say I love these men when I've only touched them through the skin of conquest? Beyond their swagger, which grows smaller and smaller as they cross further into the night, I see the mountain peaks, regal and jagged. In their shade, I've begged, fought, knelt, and won my voice, though I've not praised the faces they lift so reverently to dynamite, the tracks laid across them like scars. Soon the men will return, laughter and shit talk rippling against the glass, the brown liquid of them spilling from lips and over the rail. We'll slip back into the play, the third act, as though poetry made us invincible to the ending, as though poetry could save us from. Thank you. Andrés!
I know, shout out to Andrés and Lillian. Good to see you, Andrés. Wow.
Thank you so much for reading those, Cynthia.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, yeah. Damn.
It's like the blessing and the curse of doing an event where I have to read with anyone like Cynthia Dewi Oka. I just want to like sit with all of that and just be with it and not think about reading. Oh my gosh. Wow.
But Carlos, I am waiting for you.
Okay. Okay. All right.
So yeah, Carlos, you're up next. And if you don't mind, maybe we'll have a short Q&A after.
Yeah.
Open it up to everyone. And, you know, feel free to keep asking each other questions afterwards. But
Sounds good.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Poem about death, ending with reincarnation. After Matthew Olsman, after Tarfia Faizullah. Blood has its own democracy. My father and I puncture stakes and watch them ooze. Deep maple walls eavesdrop as steel teeth scrape and claw the porcelain we use to distract our manically clenching jaws. I'm well practiced in this ritual. Empty and fill until there's nothing. Our fillet's gone. We sit and stare at the eggshell table spread, abdomen swelling like silence. They found a mass. She's having surgery next week. I'd always planned for him to be first. Now the woman 15 years his junior, mother to my twin baby siblings, is dying, or might be. I've been rehearsing years for this talk, except it isn't. My father, held only by the dim lighting that shrouds his silhouette, reduced to heaving, I envision the stepmom it took me 11 years to embrace, being lowered carefully into the damp earth, an old man flanked by two teenagers watching, and I will be there too. An overcast Tuesday that no one passing by will remember, and as usual, I won't be able to get the dimple right in my tie for a second. Although we are nowhere near the mountains, I will smell the crisp air she so loved and remember the first time we walked without the heaviness of that first encounter both of us carried for far too long, but on that unremarkable day for most. A light rain will interrupt the hike I am on in my mind. A man will read overly rehearsed words from a book she did not believe in, and we will stand like guards, numb. We will watch over the sacred earth she spent an entire lifetime trying to protect. Now her home, flanked by roots cross-stitching the rich soil, what becomes the promise kept to those endless rows of buds ready to push through, and that twisted symmetry just above, a dangled blade from a mouth chewing in first light. There's so much about Cynthia in terms of your work and your life. There's a lot that's very different, of course, between you and I, but there's a lot that I deeply, on a profound spiritual soul level, resonate with you. And I think it's one of a number of reasons I felt very connected to you from the first time we met at Warren Wilson. But so much that you said tonight also, I think, put that into language for me. Yeah, I mean, I think so much of my writing is rooted in, a lot of my poems are narrative oriented. Some people may chuckle and say it's because I'm Colombian and I'm a cliche, but you know, and Colombians rarely encounter a story they don't want to hear or tell. Yeah, I'm just, I guess, pulled very much toward narrative, and it's very much rooted in autobiographical. I mean, they're just stories from my life or experiences. But I think my artistic practice is very much an extension of personal work and things that I'm wrestling with and trying to explore and reckon and face. And I started writing this book, I think, in many ways. We were talking before about the writing process beginning before you put the pen down. I think probably the day that my partner and I started trying to get pregnant with our first child. And maybe this is too much information, but we're all friends, so who cares? And whoever's watching right now. But I know the exact day we started because it actually coincided with our old anniversary when we were dating. And it happened to fall 2.5 weeks after Eric Garner was killed by the NYPD and exactly 1 week before Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson in the summer of 2014, which I know at this point feels like it was a few hundred years ago, sort of like this week. But that was the summer where there was the kind of that big first emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement on the national scale. I know the Black Lives Matter movement launched the year before when George Zimmerman was acquitted, but I think that I started writing this book on, like, in that span as we were starting to very seriously consider becoming parents. And, my partner being a Black woman and thinking about bringing a Black Latinx child into the world in this moment where there was, and it's hard to remember probably for all of us at this point, but there was a litany of high profile murders of Black folks that summer and going into the fall. Not that this has ever ended, not that it wasn't happening before or after, but I say high profile because that was also the time where you'd any airport or any public place you'd be in, CNN in that era would show looping videos of Black people being murdered. I don't know if you all remember this, right? They have things that block that now on social media. Like in that era, you would see Philando Castile being killed, and it would just automatically start in loop when you'd sign into Twitter or on Facebook. And so I think it's important to think about this book has really been bookended in many ways. The central motif is very much me reckoning with what does it mean to not be of the Black diaspora, raising Black children in America at this point, in one of the most fractured moments in recent U.S. history. And I actually wrote this poem the second day of my first residency at Warren Wilson College, the first draft of it. I got a little email from the app, the pregnancy app that my partner had, saying that the fetus was the size of a grape. And so it's it's the size of a watermelon, the size of a grape, the size of a kiwi. And so this is what I wrote. And this poem is called Hijito, and it's for Michael Brown Jr. and for my 2 kids. I'm enthralled by the image in front of me. My face, overlaid with his, a boy, almost a man inside the glass of a grocery store, reaching for a branch of seedless grapes. This sly mirror, this taut mirage, a coiling limb, slithers in my gut, its roots invisible, like I am, on this asphalt, to any soul that is inside, right now like he is today. She is 9 weeks along. He is almost 18, and I am grasping for any thought that is not my son, calling out breathless from the hollow lungs of night, abandoned 7 feet from the hood of a patrol car where a hubcap swallows secrets, beside a pavement-choked throat, heaving for breath, his jawline borrowed from my face, above it, a still shaking hand, crowned by smoke, uniformed in my skin. I remember, and I don't know how Cynthia or Lillian or Andres or any other parents felt about this when you were about to become parents. But I kind of felt like I had really procrastinated for the most important final exam of my life, and I was trying to skim a 39-page chapter in about 15 minutes. It was. I feel like I've been preparing to be a parent my whole life, but then you really start to think about this whole parenting thing, and you're like, who's prepared for this? What was the plan here? And so there are many things I had tremendous anxiety about, and one was being able to take care of my child's hair. I know that for any Black child, being able to take care of their hair, it's very politically loaded.
Carlos, you froze.
The daycare. I won't be the only person doing the hair. Okay, cool. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, cool. So yeah, this is about that. Getting ready to do
Black hair, politically charged. That's what we heard last. But
Yes,
just read the poem.
Cool. This is black hair.
Yeah.
I made a vow to join clustered strands with these fingers, careful as they are clumsy, submerged in this delicate calculus. I learned about love doing this, preparing for someone who might help me understand all of this better.
Carlos, you froze again.
Too late, I think. Or maybe it's something else. Poppy's hands. Never knew how to fix my sister's hair. So I tend to each thick onyx strand like I'm mending her favorite cardigan, as though my calloused hands might coax and shape anything into an ordered grace. I layer another braid across my love's scalp, and I can feel, with each pull and twist, the newly assembled crib watching. So I have one more piece I'm going to read. I'm actually going to read one more poem before the one poem. Be like TSA pre. I'll read one poem and then read one. There's a very short poem I want to read because Cynthia, you mentioned abolition, and there's a lot of folks a lot of folks in Philly have been talking about the prison industrial complex and abolition for a long time. Shout out to Angela Davis and Maria Macaba and many, many other folks who've been doing this work for decades and longer. But I used to work with the youngest folks that are incarcerated at Rikers Island for many years in New York, the main jail in New York City. And the youngest population at Rikers Island is actually children. A lot of people don't know this. But because they're black and brown, people don't think of them as children. But I used to work with the 16 and 17-year-old boys that are incarcerated at the Robert N. Devoren complex at Rikers. And this poem is for them. Morning Rikers Island. Physics and light pierce the hollow stench of the forgotten gymnasium, stripped naked of clocks. All the adolescent boys stop, offer their grief to each other like water, glancing out the only window they all share. A single ray unfolds its warmth across the dusty belly of the thudded parquet. And here's the miracle. The sun frees everyone to sing. Thank you, Sarah Audsley. Sarah Audsley's manuscript is in the background. If you look behind Sarah, I cannot wait for Sarah's book to be in the world. Thank you to the Vermont Studio Center, Cynthia Dewi Oka, Lillian Wang Cummings, Andres Reconco. This last poem is talk about of the moment right now as we wait to find out, waiting to find out about these tallies in my new home state of Georgia, in Pennsylvania, where Cynthia is, Arizona, Nevada. I have a complicated relationship with faith and with the concept of God. And this is a poem that is about that and about the moment I met my first child and became a father for the first time. This is called Father. 1. In the basement of the crack house I used to visit as an outreach worker, on 121st Street in Harlem, I was convinced he refused to travel north of 96th. I wrote a letter to Joanna on her mission in Taiwan, detailed each irrefutable piece of evidence proving we are all, in fact, alone. Told her about the 9-year-old orphan forced to sell her body for 3 years before ending up just off Times Square, discarded in a dumpster. I told her about the eldest son who answered a burglar's call and was shot, paralyzed from the waist down. I asked her about drought and famine and endless civil wars. What lessons does his book refuse? 2. When her heart rate dropped by half in less than a minute. The population of our cramped hospital room tripling in a handful of seconds. I grasped for anything that would keep me upright. At first, the wall, cool and steady, demanding my body ascend beyond what seemed possible. Then, nothing. No one. I stood in the waiting room to the OR, waiting to be called in to find out if my child had survived. I spent each second trying to pull tiny shoe coverings over my too large feet. I confessed every wrong of my life to an empty, overlit room of steel and sterile instruments that all reflected back distorted versions of myself. I fumbled for any prayer I could remember, hoping that I had all along been mistaken about the hollow blackness of the infinite sky. I never wanted so badly to have been wrong about anything in my life. And then a disembodied voice called out, seemingly only to me, a tiny growl at first that blossomed into a wail dwarfing any thought my mind could possibly hold, any faith I'd ever been so foolish to claim. Thank you.
That poem fucks me up. Yes. Thank you.
Do you two mind if we switch it to the gallery view, and everyone is invited to turn on their video and their
Lily.
and
We have
unmute.
Lillian and we have Lily. I love this.
And I would really love to give both of our poet readers tonight a big, huge round of applause.
Yes. It's so good to see everyone's faces. Oh my gosh. Appreciate you.
I'll start. I want to say thank you, and I'm sorry that I was late. I'm stupid about time zones apparently.
Oh.
I'm like 6, but wait, where? So I went to check, and it was like, oh no, I'm already late, and then I missed Cynthia's reading. I'm so sorry, Cynthia. I really wanted to see you read too, but I just want to thank you, Carlos. You know, I that poem about like the way you were saying about children, you know, and how you come to it unprepared and you think that the second one's going to be easier and you realize no.
everything you learned is completely worthless. Exactly.
It is, you know, like completely different human being. So I appreciated that. I wanted to say something about that first poem that you were reading, and about the I'm really bad with like hearing, like readings. I wish I had the poem in front of me, but it was about the death and like the way in which you were placing the speaker in this sort of I'm sure there's a term for it, and then Warren Wilson, I probably wrote an annotation about it, but like that idea of projecting the possibility into like the future, you know, and when you were talking about that, it just took me back to Warren Wilson and to that strategy of placing of revealing the interiority of the character, you know, of like what's going on inside the mind of, and where it is that the speaker wants to go, and what it is that they want to experience, and they reveal a lot of that through using that particular tense. And thank you. It reminded me that I have work to do with that, and you did it really well, and I appreciate that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And put Andres on faculty. No, I must have learned that. I think I learned that from fiction writers, probably one of the fiction workshops.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I wrote an annotation about it. It's in there somewhere.
I just feel so loved. I know people are thinking of questions maybe or not, or maybe they're just soaking up like I am. It's such a strange, anxious, overwhelming moment. I'm honestly just like soaking up. First of all of your faces, because you all just are wonderful, and I feel, but like, and then the people that I have relationships with, I'm just soaking up all this love. It just makes me. I know it's not just for me; it's for everybody. But I'm soaking up everyone's love for each other. It's beautiful.
I've been thinking about that, Carlos, of just like how much can we, it's almost like we really need to be sponges for as long as this moment can extend. Because I really think it's important that we don't make the same, just like, I mean we like broadly as like a nation, that the same mistake is not made after Obama's election, of where there was demobilization and like the conversation turned to this country has gone post-racial. It's like fascism is not gone, or authoritarianism is not gone because Trump has been, you know, voted out. Like it's in the population, and like we have to figure out a way for like how to work and coexist with each other and also turn the tide. And that's like so much fucking work. So I just feel like all the love that we can, you know, grab onto is just like soaking up like SpongeBob SquarePants. So
Well, I mean, for me personally, the work that I can do in the small sliver that I have is to uplift all of your voices, and I really, really feel very strongly that that is what I can do right now. And having you both here and reading your poems and hearing and knowing a little bit more about your, personally knowing about each of your different stories and experiences, the work is just also being committed to our practices and taking up the space that we feel, and demanding the space. And I am very grateful to have you both here tonight. And even like, regardless, I mean, you know, fingers crossed for Biden, but regardless of what happens, I feel very committed to that the work is never going to be done. And that a win still means that there's always more work to do. So, but I don't want to necessarily end on that note, but.
Can I say one thing just in conversation with Sarah, and then we can do whatever you want to do? I think also too, thinking about Cynthia, what you were saying, like building a practice of sort of being disciplined in many ways about tenderness in the face of despair is a lesson that I feel very drawn toward. You know, like there's a lot of like violence that I've been around in my life, and a lot of despair and a lot of grief and a lot of loss and a lot of things that I think could easily pull me very far away from tenderness. And in parts of my life did, you know what I mean? I think a lot of my work too is excavating the horrific versions of people I've been at earlier points in my life. You know what I mean? And growing up in kind of a very violent machismo culture, in pivotal points in my life in like adolescence, early 20s. And I think, yeah, like that's an important part of the revolution as well. You know what I mean? That's one thing I think about being a student of history is every great political social movement. I mean, man, they love to dance and celebrate and drink and hang out while the revolution was happening. Do you know what I mean? We can't forget that, you know? You study across history and you see the people who were organizing, who were, you know what I mean? I mean, damn, they love to party, you know? And I mean that, you know, like I know this is a weird party in the midst of a pandemic, but I appreciate it. So I hope we can continue to be called toward the discipline and the practice of tenderness, even in the moments where that's really hard. And I'm just saying that just seeing your faces without Lily saying a word and just typing into the chat, or just seeing Lillian or Andres, you know, I thought you were gonna ask a question and you just like said something really sweet. Like all of that, and I don't know everyone else, I don't think, but I feel like connected to you, and you know, and Sarah, you know, it's just like you all are making are like softening me in ways that I needed today, and in this moment. So thank you.
This is my kind of party, so any last minute questions or comments for Cynthia or Carlos?
It takes discipline to party. That is
The takeaway, don't worry about anything else, just take that. Don't worry about the rest of the craft stuff.
Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Sarah.
I miss you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, VSC.
My pleasure. Everyone is welcome to log off or stay on.
Like, what are we doing? Are we partying? Are we getting drinks now? And we're gonna hang out here for a little bit?
I don't know what happened next. I mean, I don't.
There's like a little mini Wally reunion that's happening
I
right now.
know. I mean, my family's gonna crash this place in like 5 minutes. So I only have 5 minutes left, people.
Yeah, mine too. I mean, there are a lot of parents on here, so you know how it goes. But I'll take a 4.5 minute party any day. Lily. Hey, Lily.
Thank you.
Oh, Lily's frozen. Or I'm frozen. I don't know.
I just want to say thank you guys for both for your readings, which I loved, but also for talking about attending to craft in the middle of this, you know, bizarreness that we're in. I find, you know, it's just been really hard to kind of like keep the ship moving forward in the middle of all of this. And I find, you know, in this particular moment today, you know, I have so many friends who are just so elated at the idea of a Biden win, that that's going to be the end of this. And I am relieved that he will win, but I feel you know, as you were saying, sort of overwhelmed by the task ahead. And it's just, you know, like one more moment to sort of find yourself at odds with like your people going, wait, we're not, you know, anyway, so it's just great to hear you talk about kind of attending to your own needs and your work in the middle of kind of like, you know, a maelstrom that feels very much like out of our control in a lot of ways. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks for that, Catherine. I mean, I really feel like craft is a method for self-determination when like none of the systems give it to us, when none of the conditions give it to us. It's like that is the vehicle for self-determination. It's like, and including, and I really just want to appreciate what you were saying about like the disagreements that come up. It's because I feel like that is exactly like the moments where sometimes I need, even inside of sort of my bubble, inside of my collective of like friends and like folks who are like of like mind, there are differences or and there are marginalizations that still happen. And so and I find like that is also where the poem becomes this like placeholder for, I'm like, okay, like we can't have that conversation right now because XYZ, but this poem gets to insist on doing that. So I just appreciate, yeah.
I have to sign off, but I just want to say thank you to the both of you for your readings. As the daughter of immigrants myself, I just deeply resonated with each of your sharings and your stories, and I appreciate your vulnerability. And I'm a newbie budding writer, so it's just really inspirational to learn about your crafts and your processes. So thank you for the inspiration and for you know, I feel like I'm kind of crashing an intimate party here, but thank you for your love and your welcoming. I really appreciate it. Thank you all.
You.
Thank you
I
for
just-
coming.
I just want to say thank you too. I know I feel like a outsider coming in, but it's really, I work at the Vermont Studio Center, and it's really great to have your voices here and your voices shared. And as a parent whose children now are both out of the house, I just want to say cherish the days because they're going to be over. And it was my daughter calling that made me completely forget to get on the call on time. But it was really wonderful to hear your voices and be a part of the discussion. So thank you very much.
Thanks for joining, Kathy. That's Kathy Black, Vermont Studio Center Program Director.
Thank you, Kathy, so much. Thank you.
Oh,
for
thank you
having
all for making it all worthwhile.
I'm CSC.
Cynthia, what year were you here?
2014 and 2015.
Yeah.
I karaoke'd my ass off. Both times I represented hard. I would just like it on the record.
the record.
I want to figure out how to do Zoom karaoke.
Yeah, we need to figure that out.
Oh,
Yeah, Zoom has to update the technology.
okay. Much love. I'm gonna take off and
Bye.
thank
Thank you,
Okay.
beautiful people.
Bye. Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
Sarah.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Sarah.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you both.
Lillian,
And
Catherine.
thank you, Sarah.
Love you all. Thanks so much.
Have a great night. Love y'all. Take care.